social worker at the Child Mind Institute. We are a national nonprofit that supports children and families with gold standard mental health care, advice, and resources, all online and accessible to everyone. You can learn more about the resources we have available for families during this coronavirus crisis, including telehealth evaluations and treatment, by visiting childmind.org/coronavirus. Today, I will be talking about opportunities for organizational skills development. I'm also available to answer any other questions that you have about parenting your child during the coronavirus crisis. Please post your questions in the feed. We'll also be posting some links after today's live with some helpful resources available on childmind.org, as well as the details about the next Facebook Live. Remember that our clinicians are here every day at 10 a.m. and 4:30 p.m., and we look through your questions daily. So as I said, today we are really going to be talking about this topic of building executive functioning and organizational skills at home. First, I want to start by explaining a little bit about what I'm talking about, right, when I use this word executive functioning skills. It is a kind of big and fancy term that really just refers to our ability to organize tasks, to time plan, to shift and maintain our attention. It refers to this set of mental skills or cognitive skills that allow us to set goals, to keep those goals, and to really manage sort of project completion as well. So a variety of things that we really need throughout both schoolwork for children, but also as adults throughout our day-to-day lives to get tasks done that need to happen throughout the day. So that's what we're talking about when I mention executive functioning skills. So keep that in mind. I'll keep referring to the specifics of what I mean as I go through the different skills that we'll be talking about today. The first thing that I want to touch on is that executive functioning skills are part of how the brain develops. So these are things that have to do with biology, right? So your child, or even your ability to time plan, shift and maintain attention, remember tasks and materials, break down a more complex task into smaller chunks, right? All of these things also have a biological underpinning. They are not just skills that you develop by looking at the world around you. They're actually something that's based on what's going on in the brain. I bring this up because oftentimes, these are also skills that run in families. So meaning that if your child struggles with executive functioning, it very well might be the case that you too struggle with executive functioning. And so this is one of those topics, right, that really pulls for this kind of nature versus nurture discussion, and knowing that it really is the combo of both. And I say that so that we also realize that there's a huge part that parents can play in some of the practice of these skills at home. So my first tip is actually for you to really be modeling a growth mindset when it comes to organizational skills at home. What I mean by growth mindset is there's this idea of a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. Fixed mindset refers to this belief, right, that certain traits are innate, that we can't do anything to change them. That might come in the form of self-statements like either I'm really smart or I'm really not so smart, or something like I'm a really good organizer, right? Or I'm terrible at organization. Those types of statements are reflective of this fixed mindset, this idea that that characteristic is a set trait and there's not so much we can do about it. A growth mindset is when we frame these things as things that we can work on, right? We frame it as something that we can work hard at. We focus a lot on the process of developing a skill or an ability. We think about growth mindset as being really important with all types of skills that your child is learning, really modeling that it's okay to make mistakes and that these are things that we're going to keep practicing and keep working on. So I like this frame for thinking about executive functioning skill development because, like I said before, we've got this biological basis that makes it harder for some people to develop these skills over time. It makes it a process that we need to work on. And we also know that there's some skills, some really discrete skills and tools, right, that you can have in your toolbox to make organizing, keeping track of materials, keeping track of tasks, getting things done easier, but we usually need to work on them. So the first step as a parent is really to model for your child that growth mindset when it comes to executive functioning skills and organizational skills. If it's something that you are also working on, really modeling for your child, hey, this is something that we're working on together. I really struggled with this, and so this is something that I'm doing, right? I'm using this planner because I'm really working on getting more organized. So step one, modeling that growth mindset. The next piece is really setting reasonable expectations. So I am going to jump into some discrete skills, right, or some of these tools. But first, I want to lay this framework for being kind to yourself throughout this process. I don't imagine, right, that quarantine is a time where suddenly you are going to become the most organized person that ever was, right? Your house is going to be spotless. Everything's going to have its place. It's just not a reasonable expectation. So in addition to having this growth mindset around this being something that you're going to work on, you're also setting reasonable expectations for yourself and for your kids. We're not shooting for perfection here all of a sudden. What we are really shooting for is making small changes, shaping over time. That might start with just getting up to an alarm in the morning, right? So just that one goal for your child, if they're going to wake up to the alarm independently. We're not going to tackle all the folders or the backpack just yet. We're not going to tackle even getting the homeworks in on time. Maybe those are things we're setting aside. And step one is waking up on time to an alarm. So we're really going to slowly roll out some of these changes and slowly roll out some of these expectations, because these skills really are hard for some kids, right? They don't just come easily for many, many children and adults. There's something that we need to work on over time. All right, I'm sure you're all ready to jump into some discrete skills. So now we're going to jump into some of these tools for your toolbox for really how we can support executive functioning skills while you are at home, how you can develop these and really support a child or yourself if this is something that you have more difficulty with. So the first one is something I'm sure many of you have heard of before. It's this idea of setting up a checklist system or a visual routine chart. These checklists can be extremely helpful for children and adults who struggle with executive functioning. One of the pieces of executive functioning difficulties is that it is very hard to take a big task and break it down into discrete steps. So if that's something that you or your child struggles with, pre-planning that, right, sitting down and actually saying, okay, so we have a morning routine before school. It means that you have to get ready. What on earth does getting ready entail, right? So getting ready for school might feel like this very enormous task that's hard for your child to really break into its specific parts. And so what getting ready for school really entails is a lot of little tasks, right? It entails getting up out of bed on time. It means maybe going to the bathroom, brushing your teeth, eating your breakfast, putting on your clothes, putting on your shoes, packing up in prior times, packing up your backpack, right? Getting ready to leave. That's a lot of small steps that each also take a specific amount of time to complete. So if your child struggles with breaking this big picture right down into these little tasks, these checklists that you can prepare ahead of time can be a huge game changer, right? So it's really that you're sitting down and you are doing that planning with your child. If you know that, let's say, school starts at 8 o'clock, right? And you know that it really takes about an hour, just as an example, about an hour for your child to get through all these tasks, you're going to want to backtrack with them and actually take it backwards and say, okay, this is how long the brushing your teeth is going to take, and this is how long the eating breakfast is going to take. And then you're backing it all the way up so that you set a reasonable time for your child to be getting up in the morning. This takes some planning and doesn't come as naturally for some kids. So that's where these checklists can be really helpful. They're great if you compare them with a visual for younger kids. So have a picture of brushing your teeth right next to the words. That helps just so that you maybe don't need to be as involved with your child actually reading through this checklist. So if your child's not yet a reader and they need some support through a visual, those pictures can help so that it's posted, and that way they're able to access it independently if you're not there to walk them through each step. So you prepare the checklist. Some kids get really into this. They love to have a dry erase marker, right? They love to check off the different steps. If you don't have access to this stuff right now, right? If you don't have a printer, you don't have access to fancy clip art, don't worry about it. This can also be something that gets jotted down on a whiteboard. It can be thrown on a piece of paper. It doesn't need to be such a fancy system for it to be really effective to sit down with your child and break that larger task into those discrete steps. So that is tool number one, is those checklists. The second piece is to think about setting time limits and also thinking about clarifying expectations for time limits. So not just time limits, but like how long a task should really take. So like I said with the checklist, some children with difficulties with executive functioning also do struggle to anticipate or guess accurately how long a certain task is going to take. So when you're going through these checklists, really practice some of that. Also have your child, think about having your child actually make a guess about how long it takes to get a certain task done, and then practice it while timing it. See if they're right. Make it kind of a game, right? So we're gonna practice seeing how long it takes us to pack up the backpack or to get the folders organized, and set a timer and see if your child's prediction is actually accurate. That can be a really useful way with a child who's willing, right, to just start to practice and get a sense of how this process works and how we need to think ongoing as your child gets older and needs to be doing some of this independently, how they can start to do some of this trial and error testing also when it comes to homework, right? And start to be better at checking and seeing how long a task really takes so that they can plan out accordingly. Visual timers are also extremely helpful for kids who struggle with their executive functioning skills. Visual timers, you can get them very easily on Amazon. I'm sure we could even post a little link. There is Time Timer is a great one, and it is a timer that you set. It's got a really concrete visual of how much time your child has to complete a task, and then that time ticks. And so you really get to see very clearly and concretely how much time you have left to complete a task. This can really help kids to stay focused, to maintain their attention to the task at hand, and to keep track of how long something is taking or how long they have to complete it. For older kids, you also might want to think about helping your child to use technology. So in place of something like the time timer, thinking about setting alarms on their phone for themselves, use the technology that they have available to practice skills that they may need when they're older. So setting alarms on your phone, right, is a skill that you use all the way through adulthood, that you can use in college. These are things that teenagers, you can really sit down with them and help them use those calendar functions, those alarm functions to set themselves up for success, to alert them about when a task needs to be completed, and also kind of how long they have for that task or when they need to transition. All right, we have a question coming in. Let me check it out. Do you have any books you could recommend to read for improving executive functioning skills in high school? I feel like my son and I have been working on this for years with minimal progress. Great question. I personally really love some of the organizational skills training books. And so these are some books. I'm sure we can post more direct links after the Facebook Live. But these are books that really take kids through the different skills that are broken down in executive functioning. So, right, I explained like this big term that you're using as well, executive functioning skills. And we know that involves a lot of actually smaller skills, right? It involves the task planning, it involves predicting time or time management skills. It involves things like being able to write things down so that you remember them. So I really like OST, or the organizational skills training books. We can certainly post some of that later. But what I like about those is they, like you said, they break it down into the smaller pieces. It also talks a lot about how you can involve your child's school or your child's teachers in some of this process. So keep in mind, right, these are skills that are really important with academics. So while some of this you might be practicing at home right now or working on right now while your child is at home, these are things that teachers also have a ton of experience helping with. And so if you can kind of guide them and loop them in that this is something your child struggles with, use some of those resources in, for example, the organizational skills training books. They give good tools for, let's say, like I give this checklist to my child's teacher and I ask them if they can send it back and forth. So if we can establish some of that homeschool connection, you can get some more progress in that area versus if you're just working on this on your own, which can be really challenging, as most of us know. Really great question. So keep those coming. Next step. So we talked about checklists. We talked about the time component of this. So using those visual timers, right? Practicing doing some time predictions. The next is, it's fairly basic, right? Most people know about using a planner. I think right now, given that we have so many electronic options and so many tech-based options, sometimes the written planner kind of falls out of style. I would say that can be a huge resource for kids who struggle with executive functioning, particularly because right now, many kids are kind of struggling with having half of their assignments shared with them verbally, or maybe written on a board, right, or now said verbally over the computer. And half of the assignments are often available on something like a Google Classroom. So your child might be getting their assignments across a variety of platforms. The planner, having something to write it all down in, both helps your child remember, right, which is a big part of executive functioning, is actually remembering what it is that we have to do and remembering the materials. But also it just consolidates everything in one place. So this is certainly something I would say folks can practice while they're home with their child right now. You likely have more knowledge about actually the assignments your child has that they have to complete over this time at home. You also may be able to get more access to something like the Google Classroom. Depending on your child's school, they may have certain rules around sort of who's allowed to have access to that and whether it's just your child or whether you can have access. This is a great time to touch base with your teacher, your child's teacher, see if you can get access to some of these platforms so that you can practice some of this at home. Really what I mean is, right, sitting down and going through with your child, where are the science assignments listed, right? Where are the history assignments listed? Finding all of them, writing them down in the planner. That takes a lot of cognitive skills. It takes a lot of cognitive energy. And so it requires a good amount of practice. Oftentimes, right, your child's given a planner at some point throughout their journey through school, but they're not necessarily taught really how to best use the planner. So this is a big part of the process that sometimes we take for granted. So this is a spot to go if you feel like you've got some time and you really want to practice some of these executive functioning skills or develop some of these executive functioning skills at home. I also like to not just have kids write down the assignments, but also start to practice in another column what materials those assignments require, right? So that there's a checklist of what they need. Right now, probably most of those things are hopefully at home, but when your child's going back and forth, having that list of what materials need to come home each day can be really important. So having a column for the assignments, a column for the materials, and then also a column for actually predicting how much time something's going to take. So if this is a longer term assignment, if this is an assignment that they anticipate is going to take a big chunk of the night, right? Just making sure that they're starting to practice some of those predictions. All right, so we've got checklists, we've got timers, we've got planners. The next one is sticking to a routine. So this is a piece when it comes to also how parents, especially with younger kids, how you can also model some of these skills. One of the first ways with very young children that you actually can start to model executive functioning or organizational skills is to start having a very clear and consistent routine. By helping your child see that there's steps, right? There's a process to how the day functions. They will get in the habit of using these same skills, of setting a routine for themselves. This ties in very much so to that checklist that I talked about before, right? So routines go hand in hand with a checklist. The checklist is usually just a list of the routine steps with checks. So helping your child also get in the habit of putting less preferred activities before more preferred activities. This is a habit that many people need to rely on when it comes to time management and time planning. It's very easy for us to spend, right, much of our evening doing something that we enjoy doing, whether that's for kids, it might be watching TV, it might be a video game, and not realizing that we're not leaving enough time for the things that actually have to get done, like academics, right? So getting your child into habits really early on of doing the task that's less preferred or needs to happen before the tasks that are fun and that they want to happen can be really good for building some of these skills and habits. So with little kids, that might just look like, great, we clean up the toys before we move on to watching the TV show. It's just that if then, when then, sort of once this is done, then we can move on to this. That helps get into that rhythm. So depending on the child, you may have a kid, and if so, this is great and you're very lucky, who wants to practice all of this stuff with you, no problem, right? Who's motivated, who just feels like they need some support, but is really excited to sit down with you and get the new fresh folders and move the materials over to where they need to be, to set up the planner, right? To make a checklist with visuals. They might be super excited about this. That's great. Not all kids are like that. So for kids who really struggle with this, you may need to build in some rewards, right? Some motivators for them engaging in these activities, for them engaging in or completing the checklist, right? This may be something that needs a motivator. So just keep that in mind. You don't need to start there, but if you're kind of moving through these things and you notice some resistance, or you notice that it's not really working to keep your child engaged in the process, you may just need to build in some of those simple rewards. Could be special treats at home, but also could just be, like we talked about before, placing more preferred activities after the less preferred activity is completed. This can be a good way to keep motivation in the process. This also often does require, like I said before, that homeschool connection. So let's say that your goal, the one goal that you're starting with, is that your child is turning in the homeworks right on time each day. You may have a child, for example, who does the homework at home, and yet somehow the homework never makes its way to the homework folder at school. If that's the case, we need the school, right? We need some support from teachers because you're not always there. Different right now, but usually you're not always there. And so you may need the school to really check in and let you know each day, did I get the homework or I didn't? And if I got it, then you know that you're like good to proceed with the reward, right? And so we need some of that communication back and forth to help us with these strategies and with implementation. And try the strategies out, right? We may need to revise the plan as we go, and that's okay. That's part of the process. These are not strategies that work for everybody. So you or your child might need to test out which ones really work for you and decide from there what you're going to keep working on. So let me do a quick refresh on all the different tools that we have in our toolbox right now. Remembering that we are talking about executive functioning skill development. We're talking about organizational skill development. The first thing was about modeling a growth mindset. So really helping your child to see that these are skills that we can work on. There are tools that we can practice to get better at this if this is something that your child struggles with or that you struggle with. Setting reasonable expectations and taking this one small goal at a time. So not expecting that all of a sudden you're going to get organized all in one day, but take this one step at a time. We've got checklists, visual timers, the use of a planner, sticking with a routine, and as I said, using rewards as you need them. So these are the tips for organizational skills development. Just checking to see if we have any other questions, and otherwise we will wrap it up for this morning. All right. So I want to thank you guys for joining me. I hope that this was helpful. And remember that we are here every day at 10 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. We look through your questions daily. So check the post for the topic for our next Facebook Live coming up this afternoon at 4:30. The Child Mind Institute is here to help with the mental health and parenting needs of this coronavirus crisis, no matter where you are. We have resources to help, from daily tips to consultations to gold standard telehealth treatments. Go to childmind.org/coronavirus. Be safe and thank you.